Hey guys, in this episode I'm going to run through some further bullish news that I'm seeing on Bitcoin. We all know that at the moment this week we are seeing Bitcoin currently teasing its all-time high of $73,500. I think we'll get there by the end of this week, but there are some more bullish news, some of which to do with the US state pension funds. They are growing momentum, and Florida is another one that's adding to its bandwagon. Metaplanet now is becoming Asia's largest Bitcoin holder, which is interesting. And also the royal government of Bhutan now have amassed a sizable chunk of Bitcoin into its sovereign holdings. And then I want to round off finally some interesting comments from US investment management firm called VanEck, who's made some interesting remarks on thesis on the outlook of Bitcoin moving forward. This article is to do with the Florida chief financial officer, who is now advocating to its state pension fund board to start considering allocating some of its state pension funds into Bitcoin for strategic growth purposes. He makes an eloquent argument for why this is important, and he stresses that it's to protect the financial stability of the Florida's pensions funds for its teachers, police officers and firefighters, requires securing the best possible returns. He argued, in fact, that Bitcoin could be a strategic addition, offering a compelling opportunity within the crypto sector. Now, he stresses that investing in these strategic growth crypto assets like Bitcoin is really much better than central bank digital currencies, which he believes contrast the very decentralized nature of Bitcoin and indeed other cryptocurrencies. So that is very interesting to hear. There is this political upheaval against these CBDCs. So this is very comforting for Bitcoin. They've actually received a 1.5 of its state pension funds authorization to start allocating to strategic growth investments like Bitcoin. The fund currently has almost $1 billion. It's actually following suit with what the state of Wisconsin and Michigan have done. Earlier this year, the state of Wisconsin Investment Board have invested almost $165 million to spot Bitcoin exchange traded funds, the infamous ETFs. And the state of Michigan have actually allocated a small amount, almost $7 million worth, into another US spot Bitcoin ETF. So in summary, this trend is set to continue, and I'm fairly confident once the actual US presidential elections come to a close next week, we're going to see the rest of the 50 states in the US to make a similar sort of Bitcoin allocations into its state pension funds, just as a growing recognition by most of the political governors in the various states in the country are, clearly recognizing the value of Bitcoin it provides, even as a store of value for its state pension funds and its state employees. So this is welcoming, and this is set to continue. Metaplanet. This is actually an interesting news because Metaplanet have actually adopted the Bitcoin standard, I think Q1 of this year, and it has already reached a milestone of 1,000 Bitcoins into its holdings. And as a result of that, it has become now the 19th largest Bitcoin holding publicly registered firm in the world, and it's the largest in the Asia region. So that is absolutely amazing, given we haven't actually concluded 2024 and has already amassed a huge amount of Bitcoins, leading the Asian region. That is phenomenal news. And it goes on to say that its main decision is to treat Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset. As a result of that decision, its Bitcoin yield has soared to almost 160% only during October this year. So if you go further back from the actual time where it's first adopted Bitcoin, so which is, I believe, is somewhere in the Q1 of this year, it's going to be much more than this yield that they're claiming here, which is only during the course of this month. So this is really kudos to the MicroStrategy playbook, which they've set for all of the global public registered companies. And thanks to their efforts and education, advocacy on the importance for companies to adopt the Bitcoin standard and treat Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset in its corporate treasury, will provide these phenomenal and astronomical rate of return. And if we move on to this interesting chart that I have here next, you can see, in fact, there are currently 92 companies, and this is as of October 30th, so as of today. So there are 92 entities who actually have declared to have Bitcoin holdings in its corporate treasury reserve. You can see that MicroStrategy indeed is the number one holder with 252,000 Bitcoins, followed by Marathon, which is the leading Bitcoin mining company with 26,000. And you've got some other household names like Tesla. You've got Coinbase, which is an exchange, has 9,000. You move on down, you've got Metaplanet, as we just talked about, it's just 1,015 now. So they've accumulated 15 more Bitcoins. You've got Simler Scientific, which is another recent US public registered company to have adopted the Bitcoin standard beginning of this year, in line with, I think, the same timing as with Metaplanet. And you can see that this list is actually growing by the day. I also like to go into the next set of news on Bhutan. This is one of the newest nation states adoptees of Bitcoin, where they made a declaration that, if I go back to this chart, you can see there is a list of countries as well who've actually made declarations of holding Bitcoin. And you can see Bhutan have got 13,000 Bitcoin, which is absolutely phenomenal given the size of the country and the GDP. I think it represents a third of its entire GDP in the country. That is unbelievable. I mean, I'm lost for words, right? You can see how passionate and how much of a believer this government of Bhutan have done to acquire such a huge amount of chunks of Bitcoin given its GDP, right? And you've got El Salvador, which we all know that they're the first and only country at the moment to have adopted Bitcoin as a legal tender. And you've got some other leading nations there at the top who has some major chunks of Bitcoin, mostly through confiscation as a result of seizing criminal organizations who held these Bitcoins. And China's pretty much the same thing. They're leading second position. I think Russia is not declared here, but Russia is another one that's currently setting up mining operations across the BRICS region. So this is interesting. Again, as with the public company entities, this list of countries in terms of nation-state adoption of Bitcoin is also growing by the day. Let's go back to the Bhutan. So in the case of Bhutan, and you can see that, there's some recent Arkham intelligence activity. If you go through here, that signals that they've just moved 1,000 of its 13,000 holding into Binance Crypto Exchange. Who knows, right? They may use that as a profit-taking opportunity. I can kind of understand why they're doing it, because as I've mentioned, it's 13,000 Bitcoin holding does represent a third of its GDP. So it may seem sensible to perhaps profit take and relinquish those 1,000 Bitcoins back into fiat. But on the other side of the coin, I feel that if by doing that, they're going to be losing out tremendously. I would urge them not to do that and really hold it on at least for a minimum 10-year period, which is how I'm doing as a Bitcoiner myself. Okay, in the following few clips, which I feel are very interesting to watch, is from a gentleman called Matthew Siegel. He's from VanEck, US management investment firm. And he's made some, in my view at least, very, very interesting remarks on his future thesis of Bitcoin. There's a few key messages I want to stress here. The first clip is to do with what he perceives to be the most significant long-term correlation factors impacting Bitcoin. The second clip is to do with his remark about Bitcoin as a non-US asset and where the BRICS have just held a conference in Russia. If you combine the BRICS GDP, actually it's greater than the GDP of the G7 combined. 3 of them are mining Bitcoin with government resources. And in addition to that, he went on to say that Russia has announced an initiative from its sovereign wealth fund to build Bitcoin mining and AI infrastructure throughout the BRICS region to settle global trade in Bitcoin, whilst the West are resting on their laurels. And then finally, the last clip, he makes a 2050 Bitcoin price prediction of $3 million per coin, and where he envisages Bitcoin at that point to become a global reserve asset with some Bitcoin allocation to be held by central banks. The 3 million may be a bit too conservative because 26-year vision is going to be much more than that, but nevertheless it's interesting to watch.
But to your question about the correlations, the most significant long-term correlations for Bitcoin are a negative correlation with the US dollar and a positive correlation with money supply growth, or M2. So clearly on the latter front, money growth has reaccelerated with the Fed pivot. That may be playing part of a role. It's a non-US asset. It's an emerging markets asset. And while we were all hyperventilating about the election over the last week, BRICS had a conference in Russia. There's 6 new members of BRICS this year. So BRICS GDP is now greater than the combined GDP of G7. Of the 6 new members, 3 of them, Argentina, the UAE, and Ethiopia, are now mining Bitcoin with government resources. So there is tremendous urgency outside of the US to find a way to circumvent the irresponsible fiscal policy that we've been running here in the US. In fact, Russia announced an initiative. Their sovereign wealth fund is going to invest in a regional initiative to build Bitcoin mining and AI infrastructure throughout BRICS with an idea of settling global trade in Bitcoin. So look, someday, I don't know if it's 5 years, 10 years, Putin's going to die. We're going to look to reintegrate some of these countries into the world financial system, and they're going to be trading with Bitcoin. What are we going to be doing? We have a model that assumes that by 2050, this is very long term, that Bitcoin becomes a reserve asset that's used in global trade and held by global central banks at a very modest 2% weight. And in that model, we arrive at a $3 million price target for Bitcoin. Now, that sounds, extreme, but that's a 16% compound annual growth rate for a couple decades. That's not really that extreme. So into the millions over the medium term is a high conviction call.
So hopefully you found today's episode insightful, and indeed we are heading the right direction in terms of significant Bitcoin appreciation in the coming days, weeks and months ahead of us. And the message is simple, is to stack some sats and hold it for the long term. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video, and I'll see you next time.